Have you ever built something so meaningful, so personal, that losing it felt like someone had erased part of your identity? My name is Adrian Keller. I'm 47 years old. 14 years ago, I co-founded Titan Axis, a consulting firm born in the corner of a Chicago basement with nothing but a whiteboard and a dream. We started with handshake deals, ramen dinners, and long nights trying to prove we belonged in the game. And we did. We grew into a multi-million-dollar firm with Fortune 500 clients and an office on the 30th floor overlooking the river. But one Friday morning, all of it was taken from me in exactly 17 minutes. They said I lost my edge. They said I was no longer aligned with the company's vision. They had the papers ready, the smiles rehearsed, and the decision made before I stepped into the room. I didn't fight. I didn't shout. I signed. I left. And then I started making a list. If you've ever trusted someone too much or lost what you thought was yours, stay with me. This story isn't about failure. It's about what happens when loyalty is underestimated. If it resonates, share your thoughts below, hit like, and subscribe to follow the full story. I stepped into conference room 312 thinking I was about to give a project update. The email from Miles had been vague quick sync with the board. No agenda, no attachments, no prep. That should have been the first clue. The second clue was the room itself. Miles was already seated flanked by two board members I barely recognized, both recently appointed. Their laptops were open pens lined up like weapons. No coffee, no small talk. Adrian Miles said, standing up like a politician, "I want to start by saying this isn't personal." I raised an eyebrow. He continued, voice smooth, rehearsed. "The board has been evaluating the direction of Titan Axis. There's growing concern that your current approach is misaligned with the aggressive growth vision we're pursuing. After careful consideration, we've decided it's time for new leadership in your role." That's when he slid the folder across the table. Termination documents, equity restructuring, NDA clauses, a buyout offer at fair market value. I didn't speak, didn't blink. I had always known Miles was strategic, but this was an ambush disguised as a board meeting. I glanced at the signatures already on the last page. They had planned this weeks ago, maybe months. The two board members avoided my eyes like interns at their first corporate decapitation. Miles leaned back slightly, hands folded, as if this was a civil exchange between gentlemen. Any questions, he asked. I looked at the folder, then at Miles, then at the view behind him, the same skyline we had stared at when we first moved into this office years ago, broke and euphoric. "No questions," I said, sliding the folder back toward him. "Good luck." I stood, adjusted the cuffs of my shirt, and walked out. I passed my assistant Maya's desk. She smiled, about to say something, but paused when she saw my face. I gave her a small nod and kept moving. In the parking garage, I sat inside my car for almost 20 minutes. No engine, no music, just silence. A man who had just been erased from his own company. But I wasn't angry, not yet, not even hurt. What I felt was something much quieter and far more dangerous. Clarity. See, Miles had made a critical miscalculation. He thought this company, the one we'd built together, was just a legal entity, a logo, a portfolio, but it wasn't. It was people, relationships, trust, and that trust didn't belong to Titan Axis. It belonged to me. 14 years ago, Miles and I had stood in a freezing basement with mismatched office chairs and a shared laptop. He handled investor charm and polished decks. I handled everything else, client systems, problem solving. But somewhere along the way, Miles stopped seeing clients as partners and started seeing them as assets. He traded problem solving for buzzwords, presence for positioning. I didn't change. I kept showing up, kept solving, kept delivering. And that Friday, when they cut me out of the company I helped create, they assumed I'd fade quietly. They forgot that the quiet ones are the ones who never stop listening. And I had heard enough. Miles and I met in the fall of 2008 in the kind of moment you never expect will shape the next decade of your life. I was doing freelance systems, consulting for small manufacturers, barely making rent, living off cheap burritos and black coffee. Miles was working as a mid-tier strategy analyst at a firm downtown dressed like someone who didn't sweat but hated his job with a quiet desperation. We crossed paths at a business workshop hosted by the Chicago Chamber of Commerce. I gave a talk on logistics automation. He spoke about organizational scaling. After the event, we shared a drink at a corner bar off LaSalle and ended up talking for nearly 4 hours. We were complete opposites. He was charisma and polish. I was grit and process. But something about that contrast worked. 6 weeks later, we pooled our savings, signed a lease on a musty basement office, and launched Titan Axis Consulting. It wasn't glamorous. We had folding chairs, 1 printer, and 0 clients. But we had belief, an unspoken contract between 2 men who didn't want to play corporate politics anymore. We wanted to build something better. For the first few years, we were inseparable. I focused on solving problems, streamlining supply chains, restructuring logistics, networks, fixing what other consultants overcomplicated. Miles handled growth. He knew how to work a room, how to land us meetings with companies we had no business pitching. We stayed up late designing decks and templates, split takeout containers in the parking lot, and celebrated small wins like they were IPOs. Then we landed Zenith Components, a contract that changed everything. Their COO, a sharp but humble woman named Lena Torres, trusted me to rebuild their entire operations model from the ground up. Miles, ever the closer, wowed their board with a flawless pitch. Together, we brought in our first 7-figure deal. The office upgraded. We moved out of the basement and into a shared workspace in West Loop. We hired our first analyst, then our second. Miles was the face of the company. I was the engine behind the curtain. It worked, but success does strange things to people. About 6 years in, Miles started talking about elevating our brand. He pushed to hire a design agency to rework our logo, something bold and future-facing. I didn't argue. It seemed harmless. Then came the PR firm, the glossy brochures, the staged photo shoots. Suddenly, we weren't just consultants, we were visionaries. I noticed the shift during client meetings. Miles started interrupting more, cutting short technical explanations so he could pivot to market trends and scalability lingo. I'd be mid-sentence breaking down an implementation timeline when he'd lean forward and say, "Let's not bore them with the weeds, Adrian." Clients would laugh politely, but I saw the confusion in their eyes. He began pushing for speaking slots at industry conferences, giving TED-style talks about growth architecture. Our client base was expanding fast, but our projects were getting thinner. More flash, less follow-through. I kept my head down. I still had my clients, my process, my team. But even there, cracks formed. One morning, I found out Miles had met privately with the CFO of a longtime client, one I had managed solo for years. He told me it was just relationship reinforcement, but I knew better. A few weeks later, he assigned a junior associate to that account, quietly cutting me out of future meetings. Then came the hiring spree. Consultants with resumes longer than their project history. Former McKinsey, ex-Google Ivy League MBAs. Bright but disconnected from the hands-on work we had built our reputation on. They followed Miles like disciples. I realized at some point Miles had stopped being my partner. He had become something else, a performer, a collector of attention, and while I was still building systems that made our clients millions, he was building a version of Titan Axis that looked good on camera. The man who once swore we'd never become like those guys had become their poster child. But I didn't push back, not yet. I told myself we were just growing differently, that partnerships evolve, that he'd circle back eventually. I was wrong. He wasn't circling back. He was circling the boardroom, and I was already in his blind spot. I should have seen it coming sooner. But that's the thing about long partnerships. You don't see the knife when it's hidden behind a handshake. The first cut was almost invisible. It came during a quarterly board meeting when Miles introduced a new growth structure for the firm. On the surface, it looked like a standard reallocation of responsibilities. He would oversee external expansion, I would focus on internal operations. But hidden in the fine print of the transition plan, documented, approved, and signed, was a clause reducing my influence in future profit-sharing decisions. Temporary, he said, just until we reach our next funding milestone. The next cut came in the form of new hires. Without my input, Miles appointed a chief strategy officer, a CFO, and an operations manager, 3 roles that had historically fallen within my wheelhouse. Each of them reported directly to him. I was informed of the hires the same way the rest of the team was, via an all-staff email with headshots and LinkedIn bios. When I questioned him privately, he flashed that same diplomatic grin I had seen in boardrooms. "Adrian, we're scaling. You said it yourself. We can't do this alone anymore." Scaling. That word again, the word he used to explain everything new, office space, new client tiers, new PR contracts. But scaling without trust is just dressing a wound you won't admit exists. Then came the closed-door meetings. I noticed how often Miles was unavailable. His calendar was always blocked out for vague strategy sessions, meetings I wasn't invited to. One afternoon, I walked past the executive conference room and saw the glass door ajar. Inside, I heard my name. Adrian's brilliant, no doubt, but he's comfortable. We need leadership that's hungry. My name, my partner, my execution being planned over sparkling water and whiteboards. I didn't confront him. I walked back to my office, shut the door, and stared at the framed photo from our first day, Miles and me, standing in front of that beat-up basement door, holding a pizza box and a copy of our first business license. I had believed we were brothers in this. Clearly, he believed otherwise. A week later, a proposal landed on my desk. It detailed a potential merger with a boutique European consulting firm backed by private equity. I hadn't been part of any prior discussion. My signature was requested not for input, but for confirmation. I didn't sign. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Nina Campos. She'd been our original corporate attorney when we formed Titan Axis, brilliant, precise, and loyal to the letter. We'd lost touch when Miles brought in a bigger firm citing international capabilities, but Nina had never removed our founding documents from her archive. "Something's off," I told her. "I think I'm being maneuvered out. Send me everything," she said without hesitation. That night, I forwarded all the documents Miles had pushed in the last 6 months, the restructuring memos, the board votes, the profit share amendments. Nina replied 2 days later with a single sentence. "Did you forget about Section 8B? I hadn't forgotten. I just hadn't realized its power." Buried in our original partnership agreement was a clause we'd added during our earliest negotiations, back when we were just 2 guys trying not to get steamrolled by clients. Section 8B protected personal service relationships. It stated that any client brought in through individual consulting work before or outside of Titan Axis's formal contracts remained personally affiliated with the partner who secured the relationship. In other words, I hadn't just built business with our top clients, I had protected those relationships in writing. If I left, they could legally come with me. And Miles had either forgotten or had never bothered to understand that clause at all. Nina's voice over the phone was calm, but I could hear the weight of her words. "Adrian, if you play this right, you don't just walk away. You walk away with the majority of Titan's value. And you do it clean." That night, I didn't sleep. I opened an old notebook where I had once tracked every cold call, every handshake, every deal that built this company. And as I turned each page, I realized something devastatingly simple. The clients were never his. They were mine. I spent the next 72 hours doing what I had always done best, organizing mapping solving. Only this time the project wasn't for a client. It was for me. Section 8B wasn't just a protective clause, it was a time bomb one Miles had stepped over, never noticing it was there. Over the years, I had personally built relationships with more than 24 clients, Relationships rooted not in corporate brand strategy or buzzword-riddled pitch decks, but in trust, consistency, and results. I pulled out every contract I'd ever worked on, every file, every email thread, with personal touches, birthdays remembered, children's names mentioned, crises resolved at 3 a.m. These weren't accounts. These were people who had come to rely on me, not Titan Axis. And most of them were still under personal service agreements that had never been migrated into the firm's consolidated legal structure. 28 clients, 70% of revenue. But I had to tread carefully. My termination agreement included a standard non-solicitation clause, tight but not unbreakable. I couldn't reach out with offers, but I could check in. I could say goodbye. I could plant questions. My first call was to Daniel Meyer, Director of Logistics at Red Ridge Packaging, a client I had worked with for 9 years. His voice lit up when he picked up the phone. "Adrian, are you okay? We heard something happened over there. I'm transitioning out," I said, keeping it neutral. "Just wanted to say how much I appreciated working with your team." Silence for a few beats. Then, "Do we have to work with someone new now? Because, no offense, but I don't think anyone else there understands what we do." I didn't say much. I didn't have to. He filled the gap himself. "If you end up elsewhere, just let me know. I'll make it work." The next call was to Evelyn Liu at Castor Freight, then Mark Davidson at Thermatech. Same pattern. Concern, disappointment, quiet offers of loyalty wrapped in professional language. I didn't ask for anything. I just let them talk. By the end of the week, I had logged 21 similar conversations. Not a single one expressed trust in Miles. Not a single one felt comfortable being reassigned. The message was clear. The company had the name, but I had the bond. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was preparing to begin. The following Monday, I rented a co-working suite on the north side. Nothing flashy, just 4 walls and a lockable door. I brought in a folding table, 2 chairs, and my personal laptop. I wrote KIP in big letters on the whiteboard. Keller Insight Partners. It was real. And it was mine. I reached out to Maya, my former assistant, the one who had been my anchor through years of chaos. She had always known what Miles never bothered to learn: where every contract was, who every client was, what every deadline meant. "Miles fired me last week," she said when I called. "Said I was asking too many questions about the client transition process." "Was he?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely. But I backed up everything before he knew. All your contacts, notes, meeting logs. It's safe." She paused. "Are you doing something?" "I am. And I want you in." "I'm in," she said without hesitation. By the end of that day, we had set up a skeleton website, opened a business checking account, and ordered a batch of minimalist business cards. The logo? Just my last name, clean type, no nonsense. The way I'd always worked. That night, I drove back to the old neighborhood where Titan Axis had been born. I parked across from the building with the cracked brick facade, the place where it had all started. The windows were dark. Someone else had taken over the lease years ago. But standing there, I remembered everything: the smell of burnt coffee, the humming radiator, the whiteboard full of dreams. Miles had the boardroom. But I had something better. The clients were never his. And I was just getting started. The first shot came by courier thick envelope firm, logo gold embossed letterhead. Inside, a cease and desist letter from Titan Axis's legal team accusing me of breaching my non-solicitation clause. The language was theatrical: intentional interference, unauthorized client contact, pending legal remedies. Miles wasn't wasting time. I handed the packet to Nina Campos the next morning over coffee in her office. "They're bluffing," she said flatly. "They're hoping you'll blink first." "I'm not blinking," I said. 2 days later, they escalated, filed for a temporary injunction in Cook County Court. Their claim: I was poaching clients. Their evidence: hearsay and assumption. They referenced client rumors and claimed I was manipulating former business relationships for personal gain. Nina stood in court like a surgeon with a scalpel. She didn't shout, didn't posture. She opened our original partnership agreement, turned to Section 8B, and read it aloud. Every word landed like a hammer. The judge raised an eyebrow, looked at Titan's legal team, and asked one question. Did you not read this before filing case dismissed? Titan Axis was ordered to cover my legal costs. It was a clean win, but I knew Miles wouldn't stop. He was a man who didn't just want victory, he wanted narrative control, and he was losing it fast. The next week, a story appeared in Midwest Business Monthly. Headline, Titan, Axis announces restructure amid leadership transition. The article was filled with PR filler, new strategic direction, enhanced client solutions, future-facing vision. It praised Miles's bold leadership and cited unnamed sources about internal disagreements. I was never named directly, but the implication was loud and clear. Then came the calls. Former colleagues, analysts I had mentored, even a few clients. Hey, just saw the article. What's really going on? I didn't play defense. I let the facts speak. I've launched my own firm. If clients wish to continue working with me, they're legally allowed to do so. Meanwhile, Maya, my former assistant turned new operations manager, dropped a bigger bomb. Miles hired external consultants to scrub our CRM, she said. But I backed up the client data call notes, service records, all of it. She handed me a flash drive. Inside were 6 years of history. Proof of my work. Proof of every single contribution that had built Titan's client base. But she wasn't done. There's something else, she said, hesitating. I found emails between Miles and a firm called Harrington & Frost. They specialize in hostile acquisitions, corporate takeovers. He's been talking to them for over a year. That changed everything. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was premeditated. Miles hadn't just pushed me out to take credit, he had set me up to sell the company behind my back. My removal was step one in a broader play: streamline leadership, consolidate control, sell high, exit rich. The board hadn't just been persuaded, they'd been recruited. I sat in my office, bare walls, cheap desk whiteboard with client names, and stared at the screen. If I had stayed quiet, if I had accepted their terms and walked away, Titan Axis would already be in the final stages of a sale, and I would have been reduced to a paragraph in a footnote. Co-founder exited prior to acquisition. Instead, I was now the wrench in their machine. Over the next 2 weeks, I made careful legal contact with every client whose contract fell under Section 8B. I offered no incentives, made no promises. I simply informed them that Keller Insight Partners was operational, available, and prepared to serve if they chose. They chose. By the end of week 3, I had formal agreements signed with 16 former Titan clients, over 60% of their revenue base. Not a single one hesitated. Not one asked for discounts or comparisons. They just said the same thing over and over. We're staying with you, Adrian. We always were. Miles called that Friday. His voice was tight, brittle, controlled rage behind a thin curtain of civility. You've stolen half our clients. I haven't stolen anything. I said calmly, I've honored contracts and trust. That's more than I can say for you. You think this is over? No, I replied. I think it's just beginning, because now I had more than just leverage. I had momentum. And Miles, he had a brand with no soul and a company bleeding from the inside out. Monday morning. Rain slicked the windows of our small office on the north side as Maya set down 2 cups of black coffee beside my laptop. On the whiteboard behind us, 28 client names were arranged in columns, confirmed, pending, interested. By 9:00 a.m., Keller Insight Partners was no longer a sketch in my notebook. It was a real firm with a real heartbeat. And the world was about to feel it. I started with Patricia Graham from Silvergate Logistics, one of our most strategic clients at Titan Axis. She had once told me in passing that process people are hard to replace. I was about to test that. Adrian, she said, her tone cautious but warm. We've heard the rumors that you're out, that Miles is reorganizing. It's true, I said. I'm no longer with Titan. I've launched an independent firm. If you're open to continuing the relationship, I'd be honored to support your team under a new banner. Silence. Then thank God. We've been holding off any new initiatives until we knew what you were doing. Send the contract. We start today. By noon, I had 12 signed agreements. By end of week, 18. Each call followed the same pattern relief trust clarity. Not one client asked about rates. No one mentioned Titan Axis. They simply wanted the person who had delivered results for years. Meanwhile, Miles was unraveling. He launched a fire sale strategy offering 25% discounts to retain defecting accounts, locking clients into multi-year contracts, sending out executive reassurance memos filled with empty jargon. But the tone had changed. Clients smelled panic. And then Miles went nuclear. He filed formal complaints with the Better Business Bureau and 2 professional ethics boards accusing me of solicitation theft of proprietary data and intentional sabotage. Nina responded with a letter containing a simple 3-sentence rebuttal and an attached copy of Section 8B. Each complaint was dismissed within 72 hours. But the real collapse didn't come in courtrooms. It came over the phone when Miles finally heard the words he feared most. Mr. Beckett said Patricia Graham Silvergate is terminating all remaining contracts with Titan Axis. We'll be moving all business to Keller Insight. Our relationship has always been with Adrian. He tried to salvage it, offered to match my rates, assigned 2 of his top consultants to the account, promised white-glove executive oversight. She declined with a sentence I later framed on my wall: "Trust doesn't transfer by position, Miles. It's earned by consistency." In a final desperate push, Miles authorized a PR campaign painting Keller Insight as a rogue firm built on disloyalty, flooding LinkedIn with sponsored posts about fresh leadership and corporate integrity. But no one bought it. The numbers spoke louder. By the end of our first month, Keller Insight had 24 active clients and $3.2 million in projected annual revenue. Titan Axis had lost more than 60% of its billing capacity and was hemorrhaging cash on downtown office rent, bloated salaries, and high-maintenance hires who couldn't keep a client past one meeting. The equity firm that had once courted them went cold. Acquisition interest gone. Investor confidence vaporized. The board Miles had handpicked turned on him with surgical speed. Questions about missing forecasts, collapsed pipelines, and internal turnover became daily storms. 2 directors resigned. 1 requested a forensic audit. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need revenge. All I did was stay consistent. Clients followed, revenue followed, reputation followed. What fell behind was Titan Axis, slowly at first, then all at once. On the first Friday of the new quarter, Maya walked into my office with a news alert on her phone. "Miles stepped down this morning," she said, barely hiding a smirk. "Resigned as CEO. Board forced it." I leaned back in my chair. Outside, the rain had stopped. That night, I opened the drawer where I had kept our original Titan business license, folded it once, set it aside. Miles had spent a year orchestrating a takeover, but in 30 days, with nothing but quiet strategy and earned trust, I had taken back everything that mattered. No press release, no war room, just results. And results, unlike ego, don't lie. The meeting was set for Thursday at 2 p.m. in a law office downtown with too much glass and not enough soul. I arrived early. Miles was already there alone. This time, no entourage, no tailored confidence. His suit hung loose on him like it belonged to a man with bigger shoulders. His silver hair, once manicured like a billboard executive, was overgrown at the sides. He didn't stand when I entered. "Adrian," he muttered, nodding. His lawyer spoke first. "We believe your client's actions directly contributed to Titan Axis's financial collapse. We're prepared to seek damages." I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a single folder on the table, our original partnership agreement. Nina had highlighted the relevant passage in yellow Section 8B client ownership structure. The clause Miles had overlooked. The clause that had gutted his company without breaking a single law. His lawyer flipped through the pages, his brow folding into itself. This changes things," he mumbled. "No," I said, standing up. "This ends things." I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. Miles's voice, no longer defiant, just human. "Wait." I stopped, turned halfway. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes cast downward. "I made mistakes. I lost track of what mattered." For the first time in a long time, I saw not the man who had betrayed me, but the one who once stood next to me in a freezing basement, clutching a pizza box and a shared dream. The man who flew back from Tokyo to attend my mother's funeral. The man who believed we could build something that mattered. But some mistakes redraw the map, and some bridges don't burn, they collapse from rot. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did." 6 months passed. Keller Insight outgrew our co-working space and moved into a full floor in a brick building just west of the river. Maya was promoted to Director of Operations. Our team grew from 3 to 10, and every client we signed came through a referral. Not ads, not PR, not hustle. Just results. Just trust. On my desk beside my monitor, I kept a framed photo. It was of the first office, the basement. Miles and me, younger, hungrier, unaware of the war ahead. I didn't keep it as a trophy. I kept it as a reminder. Build with trust. Lead with humility. Protect what matters. One afternoon in early spring, my daughter Harper stopped by the office during her college break. She wandered through the hallways, greeted my team, took in the energy. Later over lunch, she looked at me and said, "This place feels different from your old office." "How so?" I asked. "It's honest, like people actually want to be here." That night I sat on my porch and watched the city lights flicker across the skyline. 14 years of building, 1 year of betrayal, half a year of rebuilding. Some people think power comes from titles or capital or who speaks the loudest in the room. But they forget the ones who last the longest are the ones who don't need to shout. Because when you build your work on relationships, on substance, on actual impact, the collapse of the company doesn't collapse you. Miles had lost the company, but more than that, he had lost the thing he thought he could fake trust. And no boardroom ever teaches you how to win that back. In the world of business and life, really, people often assume that power comes from ownership control or contracts. But here's the truth that stories like Adrian's make painfully clear: real power lives in trust. You can be written out of an agreement. You can be pushed out of a company. But if you've spent years showing up, solving problems, and delivering real value, you can't be erased. Trust isn't something a corporation owns. It's something you earn person by person, day by day. Miles forgot that. And he paid the price, because what you build on ego collapses. But what you build on trust endures. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or quietly betrayed, take a moment to share this video with someone who needs to remember their value. Comment below, "I'd build it again, even stronger." It's a simple sentence. But for those who've rebuilt after loss, it means everything. And if you're the kind of person who values stories that cut deep, inspire quietly, and remind you of what really matters, consider subscribing. We'll keep telling the stories most people overlook, but no one forgets.